the body is inserted into a system of meaning that encompasses space, nature, topography, ritual customs, seasons, portions of the body are divided up and dedicated to members of your family group. It's not, the idea of fiction and non-fiction doesn't work in this situation. And I'm convinced, sort of a little bit obsessed by this idea that narrative is a cultural construction. And when people are talking about mythology and narratology, they're talking about a specific form of narrative that has been established in the West over the 300 or 400 year period. Different forms of narrative existed in the Western tradition earlier, pre-print culture, but the narrative systems that we're working with now in Western conceptions of narrative are very specific. So then I think, I'm Australian, I grew up in a changing Australia. Aboriginal Australians were given the right to citizen in 1967. And I'm sure you've heard about the stolen generation and some horrific things that happened in Australian history. But what I'm really interested in, is Aboriginal storytelling and cultural knowledge and memory and this sort of thing. And I think there's a lot to be learned from an Aboriginal narrative system that can be applied to new media, especially with located media and spatial media and these sorts of systems that are becoming more and more possible. One of my hopes is that by introducing the body into a narrative system, we can become more connected to place. And once place is becoming more important in story systems, maybe we can start respecting more the places that we live in and becoming integrated with these systems. So I just put forward some ideas, and they're more developed in the paper because I do close reading, and then I look at like instances of how the body is presented in an Aboriginal story system. The other thing is that a lot of Aboriginal narrative is knowledge and protected. It's secret. It's only available to certain people. You have to go through initiation ceremonies. We don't have, I thought of this phrase yesterday, permissive information economy does not exist in this culture. Information is not a commodity. It's about identity. So there's conflict there. It's also, I struggle with colonial guilt, colonial power. I'm not doing this as a romantic exercise. I've lived with Aboriginal people. I know that there is no Avatar, Pandora thing. But what's something that a book that really inspired me is Raymond Connell of Maya Economy fame. She wrote a book, Sons of Theory, which is an inspiring text, and I got a lot of inspiration from that. And this idea of the metropole, Europe, the coast, the trading coast, and then the periphery of the global south, the interior, the outpost, and then how knowledge economy is organised according to that. And I think Aboriginal narrative systems are an example of the knowledge economy that comes from the periphery, but has a tremendous sustainability, a tremendous amount of positive reality systems that we've learned from. And I think they're compatible with new media systems. This is a painting by a group of women from the Western Desert, Australian Central Desert, and it's called What Happened at the Place of Fire. It's connected to a story, also a dance performance. I explain more about it in the paper, but if I was an initiated woman from this community, I could read this image to you and tell you about it. But I'm not, so I can't. But it's a very large painting, and it's a beautiful image, I think. And this is a breakdown of how I think Aboriginal narrative systems work. It comes from a reading of the Wik people from Western Cape York, who I've had quite a bit of contact with too. And just gives you some idea of the complexity of a story and how it works in a cultural context with these people. The land, language, culture, relationship, place and time feeding into this construction. And that image was created by Dr. Annie Brand, who said that Indigenous culture reflects an oral as opposed to a written tradition. It relies largely on observation. It is closely aligned with nature and environment, with particular emphasis on cycles, patterns, and the effects each has on the other. And of course, it is based on the undeniable link between land, language, and culture. Some of the phrases that Matt was speaking about, this idea of process rather than result. There is no result, it's a cycle. And this is a performance by Wik people from Western Cape York. I'm not sure the story that it's connected to. It's a public performance. It was performed gallery in Brisbane, Australia. But I think it's striking. These are very sacred images, the carvings. There are different carvings. I know there's also, I have seen films of the small people that live underground, and they're only taken out on certain occasions. These are more public images. But it reminds me very much of an avatar sort of embodiment. And then this idea of narrative is a story that is created in a constructive format, work, speech, literature, pictures, song, that describes a sequence of fictional and non-fictional events. But then I think if we go further back, this is from Wikipedia. The words arise from the Latin verb narrare, to recount, and it is related to the adjective narus, knowing or skilled, and then going back to the Proto-Indo-European root, to know. And that's what I think narrative is becoming. It's about knowledge. Knowledge, and this is an example of a project that we're running in Humlab. We've reconstructed a building on campus, which is it's at the centre of the campus. It was built by myself and two professional builders. And I noticed every morning I walked through this building on the way to work, but when I was going through this process of building it in Second Life, suddenly I started seeing this building differently. And I noticed the structure of it, and I started to appreciate it differently. I think this is the question, that's the original building in the snow in Uminga. And I've inhabited both spaces and both places, and these places sort of join in my mind after a period of months. I could move between both, and I saw an affinity between both places. So I think this is an example of text, because I treat them as text, that's my training. I think it's an example of text that take us. And Prezi is also into space, and we inhabit this space. And then I thought, I explained this more fully in the paper, but what does this mean? And this is a work by Brian Carter, working at Missouri.
Yeah, University of Central Missouri.
University of Central Missouri. We've had a lot of contact both in Second Life and also physically. He's running virtual Harlem. He's also got virtual Amsterdam in Second Life. And this is about knowing place, I think. I've lived in Amsterdam, and I've been to virtual Amsterdam, and I recognise an affinity between the two places, or either one place. It's a reflection or something, or like the gem that is faceted. You see the different angles on it. This place is a construction. I'm very inspired by Honoré de Tazza and his book on space, and this same idea of place. What's his name? Edward Carey's book on getting back into place is something that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from. This idea of belonging also in virtual worlds. This is the still from a film, I think it's 2004, 2002, about the traveller community. It's one of the earliest virtual worlds, early 90s. It was also taken up in a very similar form of hikes that you saw about Second Life in 2006, 2007. Online Traveller was taken up by MTV. It was promoted. It was going to be huge. It's floating heads, and you speak these heads. But then it crashed. There was no business model, no way of making money. The servers were going to be closed down, and then an acquaintance or a colleague that we worked with in Humlab, he actually bought the project and is running it now on a number of servers around the world. And we've used it for language learning, teaching.
I use it in English.
Yeah. And it is an immersive environment. And we've also spoken Jenna with Machinery about the power of human voice and rhetoric coming back through these media. And you see in this world the power of the human voice and how engaging or how close you can come to another person through voice. So this is a still from a film called Avatar. It's a documentary about the community in Online Traveller, and I've got the URL for it at the end. So, and from this documentary, you get an idea of this sense of belonging, that people can come belong in these communities. Avatar Island in Second Life, which changed its policy a few months ago, I knew I had contact with people who were spending time there, and there was a sense of community around that island. It was quite strong, very emotionally strong. Icon and image, something else that Jenna touched on, and I'm sure Matt worked with also in teaching, this idea of the line between the real and the represented, the symbolic and the affective sort of thing. documentary, maybe you've seen it, Wonderland Virtual Adultery. It's online, it's a BBC documentary, where I've got the address for it here at the end too, so you can watch it. But this woman has a relationship with the man, this man, obviously that's his avatar, and they have quite an intense relationship where they spend up to 14 hours a day talking to each other through Second Life. She's married with 3 children, her husband is freaking out about this, so somehow he's accommodating it into the relationship. And then through the progress of the documentary, she goes and visits the man in England where he's a postman, and then once they spend 2 weeks together, they find that it's not the same. And then they go back to their computers in their different countries and resume their relationship through Second Life, because it's a better relationship. But I think that's an example of this tension between the iconic and the symbolic, and how it works. And then finally, this sacred place, the sacrality, which is something that I think Stefan will probably touch on in his presentation. This is an image of Ayers Rock. Uluru is a very large rock in the middle of Australia. And Telstra, the Australian phone company, Telstra, they had a big pond island in Second Life. I don't think it's still going, but they built a replica of Ayers Rock. And then Aboriginal people, the traditional owners of Ayers Rock, who have been given back the rock and have recently stopped people from climbing it because it's sacred. They were concerned about the reproduction or the image of this rock in Second Life, and they felt that it could be vandalized. And they felt that there was a reality in that image that needed to be protected. And that comes back to the beginning of this presentation, this idea that a permissive information economy, there are tensions between that and then a more sustainable information economy and a more sustainable narrative system. But I don't have any solutions to that idea, but if we look to Aboriginal narrative system, it's not an artificial scarcity, but there's an authenticity, or I'm not sure the word, an earnestness, a seriousness about these images, and that was part of this controversy. They didn't want people touching the rock, they didn't want people vandalizing the rock in Second Life. And that's something that we need to think about. These are the addresses. This is Telstra hit over virtual Uluru, the story about the rock, the virtual rock, the real rock. Then the Avatar film is available on Google Video, and it's a really interesting account. It's a machine, but voices are from the in-world action. It's not added. It's a documentary made by Canadian filmmakers. And then Wonderland Virtual Adultery in Second Life, this video also I recommend you watching. It gives you some idea of the reality of the virtual world and the narrative implications and what sort of narrative is being built around these platforms. And then that's my address. If anyone's interested in continuing the conversation, I'd be very happy